Hi, I'm Ron Sprunberg, co-founder and CEO of Hi Mama. Welcome to our podcast about all things early childhood education.
In this week's episode, we dive into an issue that all early childhood professionals will encounter in their career: young children with challenging behavior. We discuss how to understand the behavior, preventative strategies, and responding effectively to challenging behavior when it happens in your preschool. Our guest, Barbara Kaiser, is the co-author of Challenging Behavior in Young Children, published by Pearson and available through the National Association for the Education of Young Children. Her writings are based on research as well as her own personal experiences applying strategies in the classroom as an early childhood educator. If you're looking for practical information about how to understand, prevent, and respond to challenging behavior in your preschool or childcare programs, then stay tuned for this week's episode of the Preschool Podcast. Barbara, welcome to the Preschool Podcast. So great to have you on the show as a guest.
Thank you, Ron.
So, Barbara, you spent quite a number of years in early childhood education, and you've put a focus in your career on challenging behavior in young children. Can you tell us a little bit more about why you focused in that area?
Most of my work has really evolved out of experience with specific children. And when I was the director of a child care center, actually in Montreal, we had a staff that had been together for 7 years. Most everyone had an early childhood Bachelor of Education. And yet, when this particular child walked into the center, within 2 weeks, he turned everything upside down. And I think we all started to wonder whether or not this was really something we were good at. And what happened was, every time the behavior occurred, we would become so worried and frightened, not only about his safety, but the safety of the other children, that our responses were often out of control ourselves, as well as punitive. And we were discovering more and more that we were not making any difference. We could stop the behavior for a moment, but then it would just continue a couple of hours later, or maybe the next day, but he wasn't really learning any other way to meet his needs. So I started to research this, like, what can we do to help this child? And even though he was with us for 3 years, because I was convinced no matter how many times people asked me to ask him to leave the center, that I was not going to do that. I felt it was the best place for him to be because we had such a good staff and a good team. But when he actually left, we really hadn't taught him what he needed to learn. And we continued to work on the topic. What do you do when you encounter a child with challenging behavior and everything that worked with all the other kids suddenly doesn't work at all? And over another period of about 3 or 4 years, we kept working on this, and I think we got so good at preventing the behavior that it took a while for the next child with challenging behavior to come to the center. And it was so interesting because when he arrived, we felt equipped. And because we were confident, because we sort of had tools in our toolbox, and we knew that what we wanted to do was to teach him and not to punish him, we actually made a huge difference in his life. And I think it was that difference that inspired me to join up with my friend who is a writer and a researcher, and work together on writing the books that we've written on challenging behavior, because she took all of the work that I had done and she found really reliable, effective research that backed up what we did. And then I became more and more confident that this was something that I could share with others, because when you know what to do, when you understand yourself, when you understand the child, you can make a big difference in every child's life, especially a child with challenging behavior. So I'm very passionate about it.
So is it safe to say that at first it was almost like a learning by doing? So you had an actual situation with a child with challenging behavior, and so you kind of did the research yourself and then applied what you were reading in the classroom?
Absolutely. What was really happening was that I was working on another project actually for Health Canada, and they were sending me all over the country in order to do some workshops on a completely different topic. And while I was there, I kept asking people if they had children with challenging behavior at their centers. And almost everyone did. And I asked them, well, what do you do? And some of them said, oh, gosh, we pull our hair out on a daily basis. And others said, well, we use Second Step, which is a social skills program, or we do functional assessment and positive behavior support, or we do, and they all some came up with potential solutions. One of the solutions was actually a program or a strategy that was developed in Manitoba called WEVIS, which is working effectively with violent and aggressive states. And so I put all this information together, brought it back to my staff, researched it, and we worked on it. We did workshops. We asked these people to come to us and teach us how to do those things, and it really made a big difference.
You said one of the first things that you really need to do as an educator or maybe an administrator of a childcare program is to decide, okay, we're not going to kick this child out of our program. We're going to invest the time, resources, the effort to help them. What is the main thing that really gets you over that hurdle to say, hey, we're going to do this no matter how challenging it is?
That's a really good question. I think a lot of it just has to do with your sense of commitment to all children. Not everybody can make that choice. I don't blame people that feel they have to ask a child to leave because they're afraid they're going to hurt themselves or hurt others. I have to confess that on Fridays, when we had that first child at the center, I would go home and I would just take a deep breath and be so grateful that everybody was safe all week and everyone was okay. It's very stressful. It's very hard. But I think the reason my staff and I stuck with it is because we found tools. We found things we could do. We weren't just helpless, like nothing I do works, so I can't do anything, so we're going to have to ask him to leave. We kept looking. So I think that if a director, especially because it is a top-down decision, if the director really believes that if she can support that child and support the family and support the educators, that it will make a difference and she can find the research and she can find the tools and the strategies, that you can make it work. But it's extra work, but bottom line is I truly believe it makes every teacher a better teacher.
When you told us the story about how you became passionate about this in the first place, I think that really spoke to the answer to this question too, which is it made a huge difference in the specific child's life. And if you hadn't been there, you hadn't worked as a team to work with that child, who knows what the outcome would have been otherwise.
Absolutely. And it also made a big difference in the family's life. Because I have to say, when the second child, who we did make a difference, who we really could make a difference with, when his mother would come to pick him up in the beginning of the year, that for every step forward, she took 3 steps backward because she knew what she was in for. She knew, because most kids with challenging behavior at child care centers or away from home are often challenging at home as well. So she was a single mom. She had a job she didn't like. She was very bright. She was going to school, and now she had to pick him up, get on a bus, and deal with all of these issues once she got home. And when his behavior started to change at the child care center at school, his behavior at home also started to change.
Which I think also speaks to the fact that it's not necessarily for a lack of trying, because I'm sure as a parent, of course, you're completely devoted to helping your child who has challenging behavior. But I think then it ultimately keeps coming back to this point of not being equipped. No matter how much you want that child to improve, if you're not equipped with the tools and the knowledge, it's going to be very difficult.
Absolutely. And that's really why relationships are so important, not just every teacher's relationship with every child, especially that child, but also their relationship with the family, so that there's trust. All too often, there's far too much blame. I worked in the field for many, many years, and I heard all too often teachers saying, well, what do you expect? Look at his family. And that's so totally unfair, because they're doing the best they can. And if we can build that relationship and work together as a team, because they are their child's first educator, they are the expert on their child. So how do we create that trust between us and the family so we can make a difference in the child's life, be consistent, believe in the child's ability to succeed.
Which I think, again, just brings back a point in this podcast that comes up a lot, is just the epic responsibility of an early childhood educator, because that decision of, yes, I'm going to help this child, or no, I'm not, it's just because they're family and so it is what it is, has a massive impact for the rest of their life. So let's jump into the situation. I'm an early childhood educator. I have a child in my class with challenging behavior. I don't even know where to start. What do I do, Barbara?
Well, I think the first thing that, if that's the case, and all too often when I do my workshops and I ask the group, how many of you have more than 3 or 4 children with challenging behavior in your group, you would be surprised at the number of people that raise their hands. And so what I try first to do is get them to focus on, there is truly that one child who, although very rarely absent, when absent, will make a big difference in the whole culture of that classroom, the whole feeling in the room that day. And that's the child they really need to focus on, because when they can make it work for that child, then it works for all the other children, and it works for the teacher too. So what they really need to do first is they need to speak to the family. They need to find out, are there any reasons for this behavior? Did this child go through a traumatic event? Did the child have sort of biological risk factors before he was even, or she was even born, that they need to know about? They need to know and understand the child's temperament. They need to look at issues like attachment, which is so key. You know, how securely attached is this child? Because all too often, children behave inappropriately because they don't want you to get close to them, because they're pushing you away. And these are the kids that need you the most. So how do you get through that and build that relationship when this child always seems to be pushing you away? So know the child, know the family, get to understand them as much as you possibly can. And then probably the next step is to try and figure out exactly, why is the child behaving that way? And what the research has shown is that it's for 3 basic reasons. It's to either avoid or escape a situation or a person, to obtain an object or attention, or to change the level of stimulation. And most of the time when I talk to teachers about this, if I'm going in to consult or work with them, it's like, oh, he always wants attention. It's all about attention. But then when they actually sit down and they observe and record the behavior, and they really look closely at what is happening before the behavior and after the behavior, sort of the maintaining consequence of the behavior, they begin to realize that in some cases it is attention, but sometimes it's because they want to avoid a situation because the task is too difficult or they don't like it. And what I say often to early child, to teachers is, you're having meeting time, circle time. What's the best way to get out of circle when you feel you just can't sit there any longer? If you pinch the kid next to you or yell and scream or flop on the floor, what's the teacher going to say? Probably, Joey, if you can't sit and participate, maybe you should go look at a book. And guess what he wanted to do in the first place? Because he couldn't sit there anymore. So if you can figure out what it is it too chaotic, like at cleanup time when the transitions are hard, but often the transition at cleanup isn't hard because he doesn't want to stop or because he wants your attention. It's because it's so chaotic. So what can you do to reduce all that chaos for that child? How can you help that child cope with some parts of the day that are just so hard for him or her, and teach them the skills they need to be able to do that?
So the first piece, there's 3 possible situations why you might have this challenging behavior. Avoid a situation or person, to gain attention, and 3 you said was level of stimulation. What does that one mean? I think the first 2 are pretty obvious.
Yeah, and sometimes it's not only to gain attention, but to get an object. I want that. If I take it, it's mine. If I ask you, you might say no, and I don't know what to do. So, but the level of stimulation, I'll give you an example. Our child, who I'll call Joseph, at cleanup time, had a terrible, terrible time. If he was playing with the Lego, he would dump the Lego on the floor, for example, instead of cleaning it up. And I don't know how many of the people listening have heard Lego hit the floor, but it makes a huge noise. And generally speaking, when that happens, everybody stops what they're doing and turns around. So the first thing he did was quiet things down a little bit, because if teachers just think about what cleanup looks like in their centers, it's chaotic. You sing your little song, you flash the lights, and then everybody jumps up and does something. And for 99% of the kids, that was fine. But for this child, it was too chaotic. So he would calm things down, and then the teacher would generally go over and say, okay, Joseph, I guess your job at cleanup today is to put all the Lego in the bucket and put it on the shelf. So now he had a task. Now he knew what it was he needed to do, whereas the stimulation in the room was so overwhelming he couldn't figure it out on his own. And we discovered this at a staff meeting because we all thought he was behaving this way because he didn't want to stop playing. And then we thought he was behaving this way because he wanted our attention, because he always got our attention. And it was one of our teachers that said, I don't have that problem. And what she did, and what we did from then on with every child in every group, with or without Joseph, was before we actually flashed the lights and sang our little cleanup song, we went to every child, and it took maybe 2 minutes, and told them, we're going to clean up soon, and I would like you to put the Lego in the bucket and put it on the shelf. I would like you to get the markers and put it in the jar and put it on the shelf. Every child was given a task, a chore, so that when it was time to clean up, every child knew what to do. We didn't single out any child. We gave that to every child, and it made a huge difference.
Interesting. So it sounds like one of the key takeaways here is don't assume what the issue is. You have to actually, I guess, almost like do a test to see if it's one or the other issue.
Well, you really have to observe and record the behavior.
Mm-hmm.
You have to sort of be aware of what happened just before the behavior and what happened after the behavior, because chances are, it's called a maintaining consequence, because chances are what's happening after the behavior is actually making the behavior work for them. So if they want to avoid and they're in circle and they pinch somebody and you tell them that they should go look at a book, the behavior worked.
Right.
They're going to keep doing it. So once you figure it out, then you have to stop making it work. Come up with other suggestions or solutions so that when that happens, if you can't prevent it, that your response does not make that behavior work for him anymore. And you find appropriate ways of him being able to, for example, leave circle. So in this case, what I would suggest to teachers is make circle a choice. And it's not just a choice right away. Anyone who wants to come can come. That's choice one. But anyone who wants to leave can leave. And if you want to come back, you can come back. So that kids don't need to rely on their behavior to get what they need.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay, interesting. And so that's a specific example, but I suppose generally it becomes a little bit less prescriptive here because it's very dependent on the actual situation or the challenging behavior of that child, right? It's
actually easier to figure out than one thinks, as soon as somebody is willing and ready to do so. Often you'll find that there's not enough stimulating activities. The kids go outside. All too often when kids go outside, people sort of think, well, this is free play time, and this is a time for the teachers to talk to each other. And yes, there's a slide, and there's a sandbox, and there's this, and there's that. But it's not necessarily enough or stimulating enough for all kids. So what makes it more stimulating? Challenging behavior. So it's a matter of really kind of not only looking at the child, but looking at the environment, looking at yourself, looking at everything that could potentially be influencing that behavior. And to me, the best intervention is prevention. So what can you do to prevent that from happening? So,
right.
If the child is behaving that way because the environment's not stimulating enough, then what can you do to make it more interesting? If it's overstimulating, what can you do to calm it down? And then what do you need to teach all kids? And one of the things that we did that made a huge difference was we created 3 rules in our group that were all very positive, that the kids understood, which were basically to respect yourself, respect others, and respect the environment, or be kind, be safe, be gentle. We worked with them on what those rules meant throughout the day. We sent those rules home so the parents could work on it with them as well. And then we tried really hard to give those kids, all kids, attention when they were behaving appropriately, not waiting for those moments when they weren't. We tried really hard to tell kids what to do instead of what not to do. When you say to a child with challenging behavior, stop running, they don't know what to do. Should I hop? Should I skip? But
Right.
if you say, please walk, it makes a big difference. So it took us a long time to figure out, how to change our responses to that behavior and guide them in a positive way, because often the response is escalating the behavior and pushing our buttons.
It seems super challenging on the surface to deal with a child with challenging behavior, but when you start breaking it down in the way that you've described it, it does seem a little bit more doable.
Well, it is challenging. I don't want to say it's not, and it takes a commitment, and it takes effort, and it takes the team. It's very hard for one teacher to work alone with a child with challenging behavior.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
And it also takes support. It takes a director so that the teacher can come into the office and say, I need a break. I've had a really hard time. And the director will say, okay, you sit there. I'll go in the classroom for 20 minutes. It's okay.
Yeah, even just that understanding that it is taking a lot of energy to be able to manage the situation, I can see that being very helpful. Now, you said, for example, one of the things that you did was you set these 3 rules. Any other sort of tips or specific situations that you think are really good case studies that people could learn from where people did something specific in a classroom?
There's a lot. One of the other things that we did was we worked a lot on teaching social emotional skills. And one that really, really made a difference was learning how to problem solve. Because so often the behavior is a result of, I don't know what to do, I can't do this, I can't solve this problem. So we did use a proven effective social skills program that was research-based. We did not create our own. We used one called Second Step by Committee for Children. And it made a huge difference. We started when the kids were 2.5, and we taught it to all of the children. And by the time they were 5, they were amazing. They could identify a problem and figure out the solution. They had empathy. They could manage their feelings. They could self-regulate. They had really understood it, but you have to teach it. It's not, I think all too often we assume kids know this or they'll learn it just by being there, but they don't. You need to teach it. And so having a proven effective research-based program, I think, really makes a difference than trying to sort of always reinvent the wheel when you might not even be able to do so effectively. So that made a big difference for us when we did that. And another thing that we would do, that can make a big difference is meditation and mindfulness. And not to do this at the moment. Remember when it's a teachable moment and when it's not. And when a child is out of control, that's not a teachable moment. But then how can you recognize that it's about to happen? One of the things that I always think about is all too often in the morning, as the kids are coming in and you're greeting them, and now Joseph is coming in, and all too often the teacher says, this is going to be a hard morning, and does nothing other than say that to themselves because they've got other parents coming in, somebody can't find their shoes, there's all kinds of stuff happening. But if a teacher would take 5 minutes or maybe even less and sit down with him and say, boy, you look like you had a hard morning. Do you want to talk about it? Or how are you? Or do you need a hug? That could make all the difference for the entire day.
You've also co-authored a couple of books on the subject of challenging behavior in young children. Can you just tell us a quick summary about what those books are and what the focus is?
It came out in February, the 4th edition of our book, Challenging Behavior in Young Children, Understanding, Preventing, and Responding Effectively. And I think what's so exciting about my work with Judy, so I have a co-author, is that we don't have one strategy, and this is what will work for every child and every teacher. What we've done is we've done a real overview about what everybody, first starting off with understanding what challenging behavior is, understanding what being resilient is and how to build resilience in yourself as well as in children, and then looking at the importance of developing relationships, looking at the significance of culture and how it influences the teacher's expectations and the child's behaviors, and then how to prevent it, how to create a positive social climate, looking at the environment, look at your activities, and then look at what you can do in terms of guidance. What are the variety of guidance strategies that are out there? Not saying that this is the best one, but here's a bunch of them. I sort of look at it as giving all the readers, and when I do my workshops, giving all of the participants a lot of different colored threads, and that each one of them is going to weave their own tapestry, and every tapestry will look different. And some will use more red, and some will use more green, and they'll put it in a completely different pattern. But at the end, they will have created something that works for them, knowing what is available and the options that they have to work with kids with challenging behavior.
Okay, excellent. And if I was interested in purchasing a book because I have a child with challenging behavior and I want to get more in-depth information about it, where would I go to find it?
Amazon has wonderful options. I think that our book is very helpful, and there are several others. Dan Gartrell has written some very good books on challenging behavior as well. He looks at it in terms of guidance, and I think for me, I'm always looking at books that offer lots of options. Yeah, and then to look at, maybe some of the books about some of the surrounding factors, like if you find that culture is something that you're interested in, understanding your own culture and how that impacts your expectations of a child's behavior. There are, wonderful books that you can pursue that in as well. So,
and your work in terms of co-authoring some books, for example, is research-based. So a couple questions on that. One is, where is that research coming from generally? And secondly, where are we on the curve of understanding how to manage children with challenging behavior? Are we just on the cusp of it, or do we have a really good understanding of it now? What's your feeling about that?
There's a lot of research out there. I think one of the exciting things when, our publisher asked us to write the 4th edition, it was like, well, what are we going to write about? And we discovered there was so much new information. We are learning so much about this every single day. I think, right now what a lot of people are thinking about is something called implicit bias. What do we bring into the classroom? Why in the United States is there this very high percentage of African-American 4-year-old boys that are being expelled and suspended from school? Why? They're no different. What are we bringing that's making that happen? And then there are a lot of the brain research has just provided enormous amounts of understanding about children's behavior as well. And Harvard is doing a lot of terrific work there. I think it's really important. There's also so much information out there that there's also a lot of misinformation. And I think one of the things that my co-author is wonderful at is differentiating between the good research, the valid research, what makes research really something that you can count on versus research that somebody just wanted to publish a book or a study. So I think the onus is really on everyone who's listening to really try and figure out, is this research good research? And I think, going to places like Harvard and Yale and their research is often very helpful. And just looking at, the numbers involved and how long the study has taken place in order to be sure it is valid research.
And then I think it's highly valuable for people like yourself and your co-author to take that research and transform it into practical ways of implementing that in a classroom.
Absolutely. And that's what we try really hard to do is, back up our practice, our suggested practice with research. This is why you would do this. This is why prevention is so important. This is why this particular means of preventing that behavior works. And understanding things like the impact of trauma on children's behavior, the impact, and now with, the refugees and so many children that have really been traumatized and toxic stress and what children go through. How does that influence their behavior, and what can you do in order to make them feel safe?
What excites you most about early childhood education right now?
Well, I think the fact that people are trying very hard to professionalize. It's, I think, one of the hardest jobs on the planet, And
Totally.
it's also one of the least rewarded jobs in terms of salary and things that we look at as a way of recognizing what we do.
Absolutely.
And I think that people are focusing on this and trying to make it a profession, a valid profession. I also think that, there is a lot of professional development happening. Teachers really want to do the best job that they can, and they're looking for information.
Mm-hmm.
That's why your podcast exists.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
That's very exciting.
Cool. And then last but not least, if I want to get in touch with you because I want to learn a little bit more about what you do, where's the best place to find you online?
I have a website that's called Challenging Behavior, spelled the American way, .com.
Okay.
And I also have an email address, which is Barbara K. at challengingbehavior.com.
Awesome. Barbara, thanks so much for coming on the show. I know this is a super important topic, and if I'm an early childhood educator with a young child in my class with challenging behavior, I know that's something that's going to be a real challenge for me, and having this session to learn more about dealing with children with challenging behavior will be super valuable to me, as well as directing me to some of these resources. So thank you so much for coming on the show today.
Thank you.
What's your name?
Michaela.
Michaela. How are you?
Hi.
You having fun playing?
Yes.
It's a nice day, isn't it?
Yes.
Yes. What's your favorite thing to play out here?
Playing monsters.
You like to play monsters? Do you like the swings? Okay. What else you like to do?
Play my Dora bike.
Oh, with your Dora bike? Oh, okay. Do you ride fast?
Yes.
Yep. Okay. Well, have fun here. All right.